At 87, he no longer measured time in years. He measured it in mornings he woke up, conversations he remembered, and moments that still followed him quietly. Life had narrowed in a way he never expected, stripping things down to what truly stayed. He had lived a full life by most standards, a career, a family, responsibilities fulfilled. People often told him he should be proud. He nodded when they said it, but pride felt complicated now. Looking back had a way of changing what words meant. He spent many years focused on doing what was necessary, what was expected, what kept life moving forward. He didn't question that approach at the time. It felt practical, sensible, safe. As he aged, the noise of the world softened. Fewer obligations, fewer distractions, more silence. And in that silence, thoughts he had avoided for decades finally found room to speak. He noticed how often his mind drifted backward, not to achievements, but to moments that felt unfinished, conversations that ended too soon, feelings that were never fully expressed, choices that were made quickly and never revisited. He used to believe reflection was a luxury, something people did when they had time. Now he understood reflection was inevitable. It arrives whether you invite it or not. There was one afternoon that stayed with him more than others. He had been sitting quietly watching the light move across the room when someone asked him a simple question. Not dramatic, not heavy, just honest. The question surprised him because it wasn't about success or regret. It wasn't about what he had done. It was about how he had lived while doing it. At first, he didn't answer. He smiled politely, the way people do when they're unsure how much truth they're allowed to give. But the question lingered, refusing to fade. He realized how rarely anyone had asked him something that required more than a summary. Most questions wanted facts, timelines, outcomes. This one wanted reflection. He had always believed answers came from certainty, from knowing. This question made him aware of how much he had never truly examined. As he thought about it, memories rearranged themselves. Moments he once dismissed as insignificant suddenly felt central. He began to see patterns he hadn't noticed before. He recognized how often he had chosen what was efficient over what was meaningful, how often he had postponed things that mattered because they didn't feel urgent. Urgency had guided his life for a long time. Deadlines, responsibilities, expectations. Meaning, he realized, rarely shouts. It waits. He thought about how many times he told himself he would get to something later, later to talk, later to rest, later to be present. Later always felt reasonable at the time. Now, at 87, later felt different, not threatening, just absent. He noticed that the moments he missed weren't dramatic. They were quiet, ordinary, the kind you only recognize once they're gone. The question didn't accuse him, it didn't judge. That made it harder to ignore. It simply asked him to look honestly at the life he had lived. He began to understand that perspective changes when time feels finite. Things that once felt important shrink, things once overlooked grow heavy. He realized that for most of his life, he had been moving forward without asking himself why. Momentum had replaced intention, and as he sat with that question still unanswered, he felt something shift inside him, an awareness that whatever time remained would no longer be lived on autopilot. He began to sit with the question longer than he was comfortable with. In the past, discomfort was something he solved quickly, either by distraction or by logic. Now he let it stay. He sensed that rushing past it would mean missing something important. He realized how rarely he had paused to ask himself how he felt about the life he was building while he was building it. He had focused on progress, not presence, on outcomes, not experiences. It had seemed practical at the time. As the days passed, the question resurfaced in unexpected moments, while drinking his morning tea, while listening to the quiet hum of the house, while watching people move through their lives at a pace he could no longer match. He noticed how his memories no longer arranged themselves around achievements. They gathered around people, faces, voices, the way certain moments felt rather than what they produced. He thought about how often he had assumed time would correct things on its own, that relationships would mend naturally, that understanding would come later, that there would always be another opportunity to say what mattered. The question forced him to confront how much of his life had been guided by habit. He hadn't chosen many paths consciously. He had followed what was laid out in front of him because it felt sensible. He saw how easily days turn into decades when you don't stop to examine them, how motion can feel like direction even when you don't know where you're going. He remembered moments when his intuition tried to slow him down, when something inside him said, "Pay attention, stay here, this matters." He remembered how often he ignored that voice in favor of responsibility. The question didn't bring immediate answers. It brought clarity instead, a clearer view of what he had prioritized and what he had postponed. He understood now that life isn't shaped only by big decisions. It's shaped by small, repeated choices, what you give your attention to, what you delay, what you dismiss. He noticed how often he had treated rest as a reward instead of a necessity, how he had postponed joy until conditions felt right, conditions that were never fully satisfied. As he reflected, he felt no urge to judge his past harshly. He saw it with honesty, not bitterness. He had done what he knew how to do at the time. What unsettled him was not regret, but awareness. Awareness arriving late has a particular weight. It doesn't scream, it settles. He began to sense that the question wasn't asking him to relive the past. It was asking him to reframe what remained. He realized that even at 87, perception could still change. And changing how you see things changes how you live whatever time you have left. The world around him hadn't changed. The room was the same. The routines were the same. But his relationship to them felt different. He started paying attention in ways he hadn't before, listening more closely, lingering longer, letting moments finish instead of rushing past them. The question had slowed him down, not physically, but internally. It interrupted momentum he didn't realize he was still carrying. And as he continued to sit with it, he understood that this single question had not given him answers. It had given him a lens, one that quietly reshaped everything he thought he knew about his life. With that new lens, familiar memories began to feel unfamiliar. He saw them not as fixed points in the past, but as moments shaped by the way he had shown up or failed to. It wasn't painful in the way he expected. It was clarifying. He noticed how often he had rushed through days as if they were obstacles to overcome rather than experiences to inhabit. Productivity had always felt virtuous. Slowing down felt irresponsible. Now he wondered who had taught him that. He thought about the people he loved and how differently he might have met them if he had been less preoccupied with what came next. How many conversations he had half listened to while preparing his response. How many moments he had missed while planning the future. The question kept returning, not demanding an answer, but inviting one. It asked him to notice the quality of his attention, not the quantity of his accomplishments. That distinction felt new. He began to understand that meaning doesn't announce itself loudly. It appears quietly, often in ordinary moments that don't seem important until they're gone. He had overlooked many of those moments by being elsewhere mentally. He remembered times when he felt a subtle pull to pause, to stay longer, to listen deeper, to choose connection over efficiency. Those moments had felt inconvenient then. Now they felt essential. He realized how often he had equated control with security. Planning had given him a sense of safety, but it had also kept him distant from uncertainty, where intimacy and presence live. As the days passed, he felt less interested in conclusions and more interested in awareness. He didn't need to summarize his life anymore. He wanted to experience what remained with intention. He noticed small changes in himself. He asked better questions. He waited longer before speaking. He allowed silence to exist without filling it. These changes felt subtle but profound. The question had softened him, not weakened him, softened him. It loosened the grip of certainty and made room for curiosity, something he hadn't practiced in years. He began to see that life isn't only about what you build, it's about how you inhabit what you build. A house can be full and still feel empty. A life can be busy and still feel untouched. He thought about how often people chase answers when what they need is attention. Attention to what's here, to who's here, to what's being felt right now. He felt a quiet gratitude for the question itself, not because it came early, it didn't, but because it came at all. Awareness, he realized, is never wasted, no matter when it arrives. The future no longer felt like something to manage. It felt like something to meet. That shift changed the weight of each day. He didn't try to resolve the question. He let it live with him, shaping how he noticed, how he listened, how he chose to be present. And in that quiet companionship with the question, he discovered something unexpected. Seeing differently didn't change his past, but it changed how fully he could live the time that was still unfolding in front of him. He began to sense how much of his earlier life had been lived in anticipation rather than awareness, always preparing for the next stage, the next responsibility, the next version of himself. He had treated the present like a hallway instead of a room. The question made him notice how often he had postponed being fully present until circumstances improved. When work eased, when obligations lessened, when things felt more secure. Those conditions had always seemed just around the corner, yet they never fully arrived. He reflected on how rarely he had allowed himself to simply experience a moment without evaluating it. Even joy had often been measured, compared, or filed away as something to revisit later. He wondered how many moments lost their meaning because he never let them be enough on their own. He started to see his life less as a straight line and more as a series of choices about attention. Where he placed it, where he withheld it, where he assumed it didn't matter. That realization reframed everything. He noticed how much gentler he felt toward himself now. There was no urge to rewrite the past or judge it harshly. Understanding felt more useful than blame. It gave him room to breathe. The question didn't ask him to regret. It asked him to recognize, to see what had been driving him all along: fear of falling behind, fear of wasting time, fear of not doing enough. Ironically, those fears had kept him from fully living. He thought about how often he had rushed people, not intentionally, but subtly, finishing their sentences, steering conversations toward conclusions. He saw now how those habits shaped the depth of his connections. He began allowing conversations to unfold without direction, letting people speak at their own pace, letting silence do some of the work. These moments felt richer than he expected. The days felt quieter, but not emptier. Quiet no longer felt like something to escape. It felt like a space where clarity could exist, where the question could continue doing its work. He realized that the question hadn't changed the world around him. It had changed the way he stood inside it. That shift altered everything without altering anything at all. He felt less compelled to explain himself, less interested in being certain, more willing to stay with not knowing. That willingness felt like freedom. He thought about how many answers he had chased in his life, believing they would bring peace. Now he saw that peace had more to do with how honestly you look than what you conclude. He began to treat each day as complete in itself, not as preparation for something else. Mornings no longer felt like beginnings of tasks. They felt like invitations. The question continued to accompany him, not heavy, not urgent, but steady, a quiet reminder to stay awake to what was happening instead of rushing past it. He noticed that even ordinary moments carried more weight now: a shared smile, a slow walk, the sound of a familiar voice. These things no longer felt small. He understood that perspective doesn't arrive all at once. It deepens gradually, shaped by attention and patience, and he was finally giving both. As time continued forward, he didn't feel the need to resolve the question or answer it definitively. He allowed it to remain open, trusting that how he lived with it mattered more than any single response he could give. He began to notice how the question changed his relationship with time itself. Hours no longer felt like something to fill or escape from. They felt like something to enter, to be inside of, rather than rush through. He caught himself smiling at small things he once would have overlooked: the way sunlight settled on the floor, the rhythm of footsteps outside, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a thought instead of interrupting it. These moments felt complete in a way achievements never had. He realized how often he had lived slightly ahead of himself, mentally rehearsing what came next instead of experiencing what was happening now. The question gently pulled him back, again and again, whenever his mind tried to run. There was a humility in recognizing how much he didn't know about his own life while he was living it. Not ignorance, but inattention. That realization didn't shame him. It softened him. He thought about how many people spend their lives waiting for clarity before slowing down, when slowing down is what creates clarity. That reversal stayed with him. He began speaking less about what he had done and more about what he had noticed. Conversations felt less like exchanges of information and more like shared presence. That shift surprised people and surprised him even more. He noticed how the body responds when the mind stops racing. His breathing deepened, his shoulders relaxed. It was as if he had been bracing for something that never arrived. The question continued to work quietly without demanding attention. It showed up in pauses, in choices, in the way he listened. It didn't push him forward, it rooted him where he was. He stopped trying to measure whether he was doing enough with the time he had left. Measurement felt like an old habit. Awareness felt more honest. He began to understand that seeing clearly doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from staying present long enough for the noise to fall away. And with each day that passed, the question remained, not as a problem to solve, but as a companion that gently guided how he noticed, how he listened, and how fully he allowed himself to be where he already was.